I've reached my limit. I hate to ask, but can I crash at your place for a few days? Dad had been kicked out of the family home by my sisters and mom, and now he stood at my doorstep. Seeing Dad, who had always been so strong, talk about reaching his limit, I blamed myself. I'm sorry, Dad. In that moment, as I tried to apologize for my inability to help alleviate his suffering, my husband Ethan spoke up. Let's live with your father. Are you sure? I turned to Ethan, surprise evident in my voice. Dad, too, could barely hide his shock, his eyes wide open. My name is Emily, I'm 26 years old. Ethan and I started dating in college, and we got married 2 years ago. Our days are filled with a fulfilling work-life balance. Ethan is my best supporter, always by my side. I never thought I'd find someone who gives me such confidence, let alone marry them. As the youngest of 3 sisters, I grew up in an environment where I could never go against my mom and my sisters. I was always the last one in line for attention from mom, and also the lowest in rank among my sisters. Every time I voiced an opinion, sharp words would come flying back at me. Over time, I stopped expressing myself and started to suppress my feelings. I bore the treatment of being treated like a servant by mom and my sisters without complaining. I wanted a boy. When I found out you were another girl, I was so disgusted. Grace and Ashley are enough for girls. You're an unwanted child. And yet here you are, in this house. If you want to stay here, you have to work. Mom often belittled me like this. Even if you tell me that. How many times have I swallowed my words, the ones I wanted to say back to her? By the time I entered elementary and middle school, I was in charge of most of the household chores, from preparing meals and doing laundry to getting the bath ready. People around me would praise me saying, "That's impressive," or "You're so responsible," but I only found joy in that at first. It's a given that you do all these things, Mom would say, with no word of thanks or praise. Instead, I was constantly being reprimanded for my cooking or the way I folded the laundry. The one who kept me going through all this was Dad. Unlike Mom and my sisters, Dad loved me and respected me. As the only man in the family, Dad was not well liked by Mom and my sisters, and his power within the family was as low as mine. But he always stood up for me. I'm sorry, Emily. You always have to put up with so much. If only we could all live in harmony. Dad would often hold me tight and say these things. Despite his early mornings and late nights for work, Dad would always spend his days off with me, fulfilling Mom and my sister's demands together. And he always listened to my feelings and accepted my words. But Mom and her cohorts didn't seem to like that. There's no one to protect you today, they'd tell me, pushing more chores onto me. They'd hurl harsh words at Dad too, such as "for a man, low income." And my sisters would follow their lead, laughing and saying, "Disgusting," and "Don't open your mouth." So no matter how much Dad tried to be a pillar of support, I was becoming increasingly frail. Noticing my distress, Dad said something to me when I entered high school. Emily, study as much as you can. Then go to college. Leave this house and live on your own. You, Emily, have so many possibilities. There's no need to endure and stay in this house forever. I want you to live your life. My father urged me. At his words, I felt both elated and anxious. At the time, my eldest sister Grace, 6 years older than me, was attending a private university. Ashley, 4 years older, was at a vocational school. Mom would often ridicule Dad for his low income and tell me, "We're poor because he doesn't bring in money. So, you should start working once you graduate from high school." Because of this, I believed our family was financially struggling. Despite that, I worried if Dad was pushing himself too hard, telling me to go to college and live on my own. But Dad insisted there's no need to worry about money. I feel responsible for making Emily suffer so much. That's why I don't want her to endure any longer. Dad, this is a request from your father. You don't have to worry about anything. Just go to the university you want, study what you want. Find what you love to do. I want you to lead a happy life to make up for the hardship you've been through. I could feel his strong resolve as he gripped my shoulder, his eyes moist with tears. From then on, I devoted myself to the studies I had neglected. Juggling the overbearing instructions from Mom and my sisters, I spent all my remaining time studying at my desk. My hard work paid off, and I was accepted into a university. Dad and I embraced each other, sharing the joy of my acceptance. I kept it a secret from Mom and my sisters until the last minute, only announcing my plans to go to college and live alone on the day I was moving. At that time, Grace had already moved out and was living on her own, leaving only Mom and Ashley at home, who showered me with shouts of rage. I endured their harsh words until the end, finally breaking free from them. I kept my new mobile phone, a gift from Dad, a secret, not telling them which university I was going to or where I was going to live. Though I stayed in touch with Dad, I started a life without any involvement with Mom or my sisters. But just because I escaped from them, didn't mean my university life was smooth sailing. I wasn't used to speaking my mind, and as a timid person, I was somewhat invisible in my department, unable to make friends. Then, Ethan reached out to me. "What do you think, Emily?" I was surprised when Ethan, the bright and central figure of the group, spoke to me. I was already uncomfortable speaking in front of people, and being put on the spot by him left me speechless. But Ethan pressed me. "You have thoughts, right? Share them. We won't know unless you say something." A person who is pushy and doesn't consider other people's feelings. I initially thought of Ethan as pushy and inconsiderate. But as time passed, I came to see the kindness in Ethan, how he respected people's opinions. Thanks to Ethan, I started to make friends. Before long, I found myself drawn to Ethan, and by our third year, our relationship had progressed to dating. When I started dating Ethan, Dad excitedly congratulated us. And when I found a job, when Ethan and I decided to move in together, and when we decided to get married, Dad celebrated my happiness as if it was his own. But I had always been worried about Dad. Since starting university, I hadn't been home and hadn't seen Dad even once. We stayed in touch, but I was still concerned. Dad was living at that place with Mom and the others. I had no doubt he was still enduring snide comments from Mom and Ashley, still spending his days under their domineering instructions. "Dad, I'm happy today because of you. Back then, I was powerless and always needed your help. But things have changed. I'm working now, and I'm married. I have someone who supports me. So now, it's my turn to help you. Please let me know if you're in any trouble." When I announced my marriage, I told him that. Having learned the importance of expressing my feelings to others since being with Ethan, I was finally able to put into words what I had never been able to tell Dad before. "Thank you." Dad replied that way, but until now, 2 years later, Dad never asked me for help. Furthermore, recently I heard that Grace, who was supposed to be living alone, quit her job and returned to our parents' house. My worry for Dad had only increased. Then one day, the doorbell rang just as I was confiding in Ethan about how worried I was about Dad. December was almost over, and even though it wasn't even 4 p.m., it was already getting dark outside. We had no scheduled deliveries, so we were surprised when we looked at the screen of the intercom. The person shown by the camera was none other than Dad. I rushed to the front door and opened it. Seeing Dad for the first time in 8 years, his cheeks were hollowed out and there was more white than black in his hair. He looked visibly unwell. I instinctively knew that his sudden visit without any notice wasn't for a casual reason. "Dad, what's happened? Please come inside. It must be cold outside." Dad was wearing trousers and a long-sleeved shirt. Even in December, this seemed too thin. Why would he be outside dressed like that? But the reason was revealed from Dad's mouth. Dad was kicked out of the house by Mom and the others. "They told me to go buy dessert, so I went to the nearby convenience store, but when I came back, the house was locked. I asked them to open up, but they told me not to come back and didn't let me in." "What?" "I left the house without my phone or jacket. But I waited for several hours and they didn't seem to let me in." As Dad rubbed his cold body, he told us about what happened that day. I quickly made some hot tea and gave it to Dad. Dad held the teacup with both hands to get warm and muttered softly, "I might not be able to go back to that house again." "Why?" "Ever since Grace came back, Mom and the others' attitude got even worse. I was feeling at my limits too. And then they did this to me. I don't even have the energy to go back. I think I should look for a monthly apartment and think about what to do in the future. I'm sorry, but could I stay here for a few days? I'll leave as soon as I find an apartment." I was worried, but I hadn't imagined it was this bad. Dad, who had never complained before, was talking about his limits. "I'm sorry, Dad." I was about to apologize to Dad for knowing about his troubles and not being able to do anything when. "Let's live with your father." Ethan raised his voice. "Are you sure?" I turned to my husband in surprise. Dad, too, unable to hide his surprise, opened his eyes wide. "Sorry for being blunt, especially since we just met, but your father-in-law doesn't look too healthy. I think it would be best if we lived together to help him recover. Everything else can be figured out later. Of course, only if he's okay with this." Ethan's suggestion left Dad and I with nothing but gratitude. And so, our new life as a trio began. Just a few days after Dad moved in, our doorbell rang again. All three of us were stunned by the figures displayed on the intercom screen. Mom and my sisters were standing there. "Why here?" Shock and bitter past memories made my breath hitch. But I had to face them. I didn't know what they would do next. In a panic, I opened the door. "Wow, I didn't expect you to be living in such a fancy place. I thought you were scraping by in some rundown apartment." Hearing Mom's voice after such a long time, all I could feel was resentment. "Why are you here?" "Your father's mobile had your address in it. I had no idea Emily even had a mobile phone. Why would you give him your contact info but not us? Are you honoring the wrong person?" Just as before, Grace arrogantly looked down at me after Mom's words. Seeing her like this, Mom smiled satisfied and spoke again. "Well, never mind. Is your father here? We're having some trouble without him." Even though she said they were in trouble, there was no sign of actual distress. All three of them were smirking. "In trouble? But you're the ones who kicked him out. You've become quite sassy, haven't you? So he is here. Move aside." "No!" I yelled at Mom and her group. Mom's typical overbearing tone and her condescending remarks about me fueled my irritation. It would have been impossible in the past. But I had changed, all thanks to Ethan. However, Mom's irritation became apparent as she raised her voice. When did I ever give you permission to talk back? Just move. You can't even listen to what I say? I'm not the same person I used to be. I won't be pushed around by you, Mom. I refused firmly. Ethan came up beside me, trying to shoo Mom and the others away. Despite our efforts, Mom and her group wouldn't leave. We repeated move and no until, tired of the ordeal or maybe having given up, Mom was the one to break first. That's enough. I don't want to hear any more from you. If you won't move, can you at least let us know when the money will be deposited in our account? It's really annoying that all you can do is put money in, and you can't even do that. I was speechless at Mom's words. How did she think she's been able to live without working? My anger reached its peak. From now on, Dad will be living with us. Dad and I will no longer be pushed around by you guys. Please divorce Dad and stop causing him pain. As I couldn't hold back my words any longer, the response from Mom was something I hadn't anticipated. Don't make it sound like I'm the bad guy. I've been kind enough to stay as a family with a man like him who is low income and can't do a thing. You should be thanking me. What? You're just like your dad, a low-income loser. Acting high and mighty, but in the end, all you're doing is licking each other's wounds. I felt like I was about to lose control at Mom's words. I was on the verge of raising my voice, of lashing out. But then my husband spoke. Emily works hard. She's a supervisor, earning a decent wage. I'd appreciate it if you didn't belittle us with comments about licking wounds. As my husband stared down Mom, she retorted. Don't you dare talk back to me. You're an outsider, so stay quiet. That's when Mom turned on Ethan. Dad, who should have been in the living room, was suddenly at my side, addressing Mom. I've heard enough. We can't impose on Emily and Ethan anymore. Let's get a divorce. Dad? At Dad's words, my sisters chimed in with, That's fine, that's fine. We don't need a creepy guy like you. One voice called out. Emboldened by my sisters, Mom agreed. That's fine by me. I was dumbfounded by how quickly things had been resolved, but the peace didn't last long. But there's one condition. Hand over that house to me. Then I'll give you your divorce. Mom laid out her demand. Just how greedy could this woman be? But Dad quickly agreed to Mom's demand. Dad, are you sure? I was shocked, but Dad turned to me and smiled. If that's all it takes to get a divorce, it's a small price to pay. He then turned back to Mom, his face serious. I'll do as you ask. Leave for today. I'll come over tomorrow. With that, Dad sent Mom and my sisters home. They continued to belittle me until the end, but I didn't care. I felt guilty for pushing for a divorce and causing Dad to lose his home. But Dad patted my shoulder. It's not your fault, Emily. In fact, I'm glad you spoke up. The next day, Dad went back home one last time with the divorce papers. He made Mom fill out the divorce application, handled some paperwork, and packed his belongings. When Dad came back from our family home, he looked somehow lighter. It was sad to see the house go to Mom and my sisters, but if Dad felt relieved, I was okay with it. A few months later, Dad told me what had happened to Mom and my sisters. They had taken the family home as part of the divorce settlement and planned to live lavishly by selling it. However, the house was old, the location wasn't great. They couldn't sell the house or land for much, and demolition costs ate into the proceeds. In the end, they were left with almost nothing. Now without a home or savings, Mom didn't work. Neither did Grace or Ashley have stable jobs. And with Dad gone, the same dad they ridiculed for his low-income status while they leaned on him for living expenses. The trio found themselves in dire straits. They tried seeking help, showed up at our house several times, but we never opened the door to them. Still, they refused to give up, causing commotion at the front porch. I finally had to tell them through the intercom, "If you make any more noise, I'll call the cops." That sent them packing. Now, it seems they're barely managing, renting an apartment that's too cramped for three. Even Mom, who never worked before, was seemingly forced to get a job. That's how desperate they were. Despite all the times they made fun of Dad and I as a trio, they now seem to be constantly bickering among themselves. They appear to be blaming each other for their current circumstances. People rarely change. With neither Dad nor me around anymore, the ones they used to ridicule, they can't help but find someone else to target. It seems they're destined to lead lives filled with both physical and emotional poverty. Meanwhile, our lives have taken the polar opposite trajectory. Despite all their mockery about Dad being low income, he had actually been trading stocks for years, amassing a fortune. We only learned about this after the divorce was finalized. Dad feared that if any information leaked out, the trio would try to seize his assets. So, he had decided not to mention it until the divorce was over. That's probably why he didn't mind giving up the family home. Now, we're living comfortably in a new house that Dad built with his wealth. He quit his job to focus on his stocks. My husband and I have jobs too, so we're not struggling financially. We support each other while each maintaining our own financial independence. We hope to build the loving family that we couldn't have when we were young, from here on out. Mom! It had been over 6 months since I'd last heard from my daughter, Violet, when her call came through. And it was past 8 p.m. It was rare for Violet, who had her own family, to call at such an hour unless it was daytime. I instinctively felt that something serious must have happened. "Violet? What's going on? Calling at this hour? What happened?" At first, Violet didn't respond. All I could hear from the other end of the phone was a quiet voice, as if air was leaking out. "Mom!" With a thin voice, as if squeezing it out, Violet finally spoke. "Violet. What's wrong? Are you really okay?" "Mom, help me!" Realizing it was an emergency, I hit the speaker button on the phone. Immediately, my husband Matthew rushed to my side, listening intently. "Violet, pull yourself together. What happened?" "It hurts. I haven't eaten anything. I might not make it." "Haven't eaten anything? What do you mean?" "I haven't been given anything to eat by Florence and the others." The image of Violet crawling on the floor, desperately reaching out to me for help, flashed through my mind. "That's too dangerous for you," Matthew yelled, grabbing the car keys and heading to the door. "I'm coming to get you right now," I shouted through the phone, hurrying after Matthew. My name is Sierra Smith. I'm 70 years old. Currently, Matthew and I run a steakhouse together. Matthew, having trained in famous restaurants when he was younger, is well regarded for his skills. Matthew and I met through a relative's introduction, and he opened his own restaurant when we got married. Not only is Matthew skilled in his craft, but his adept conversation skills and unpretentious personality have won over many regular customers. It's been nearly 30 years since I started helping out at the shop, but lately, I've begun to feel my body's decline. Perhaps due to age, I've started to feel pain in my back with just a little movement. Matthew has suggested hiring part-time help, but while grateful for his concern, I worry about labor costs and choose to work while I still can. Sometimes, Matthew jokes, "It would have been nice to have her around at times like this." referring to our only daughter, Violet. Since she's already independent and has her own family, we can't ask her to come back home and help with the shop. Violet currently lives with her husband Albert, their son Kendrick, and her mother-in-law Florence in the next town over, about an hour's drive from our home. Recently, her sister-in-law Aurora joined them. I don't know the details, but I heard Aurora returned home after her divorce. I had hoped that Violet would help out at our shop after graduating from college, but Violet left home, saying she wanted to see more of the world. After that, she landed a job at a major department store, working in the ladies' clothing section. Though new to the workforce, Violet quickly won over customers with her charm and inherent cheerfulness. It was there she met her future husband, Albert Adams, who worked in the external sales department, dealing primarily with affluent clients purchasing luxury goods, and was considered a star in one of the company's most prestigious divisions. When Violet first introduced me to Albert, I felt a twinge of unease. "Are you sure it's okay to marry such a perfect man?" Indeed, Albert, with his handsome features and skillful conversation that appealed to women, had won over many customers, some of whom visited the store specifically to see him. Yet, Violet seemed unworried. "It's okay, Mom. Don't worry. I trust him." Subsequently, Violet married Albert, and upon doing so, left the department store to devote herself to supporting Albert as a housewife. The following year, the joy of having a grandson, Kendrick, allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief. It seems, despite everything, those two are doing well. For a while, the family of 3 lived in an apartment, but 5 years ago, following the death of the father-in-law, they moved to the elderly mother-in-law's house, thinking she would feel lonely by herself. Occasionally, Violet would call home, but she started to lament that Albert was often not around. "Albert stayed over at a colleague's apartment again last night because work was late. It's been happening a lot recently. Even on weekends, he's away for golfing with his college." Still, Violet laughed it off over the phone, suggesting it might just be the fate of a working adult. One day, I decided to call Violet after a long time. "Kendrick's birthday is coming up, right? Do you have any plans for the day?" "So far, we don't have anything planned for the daytime." "What's up?" "Perfect. Our shop is closed that day, so how about the 3 of us go out somewhere? An amusement park or aquarium, somewhere that would make him happy." "That sounds nice. Recently, Albert's been so busy with work, he hardly comes home. Kendrick has been getting bored without being able to go out." Violet sounded excited over the phone, but as Kendrick's birthday approached, she called me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I hate to say this, but some plans have come up since then. We can't go out with you after all. I'm really sorry." "Plans? What happened?" "A kids' club has organized a birthday party, so we can't make it that day." "A kids' club, huh? I guess you can't just cancel on them." Though disappointed, I switched gears. "Then it doesn't have to be Kendrick's birthday. Let us know whenever you're free." "I'm sorry, Mom. It doesn't look like we'll be able to go out for a while. Next week, there's a nature class at the kids' club, and the week after that, swimming lessons start. We're just too busy. Elementary school kids these days sure have it tough. It's disappointing, but it seems like giving up is the only option." I had been looking forward to seeing my granddaughter, so my disappointment was significant. I asked some of the parents who are regulars at our restaurant about what gaming consoles are popular with kids these days and sent one to Kendrick. "Mom, the gift arrived. Thank you." I received a thank you call from Violet. However, something about Violet's voice, which I should be familiar with, felt off to me. Maybe it's a mother's intuition, but Violet, usually bright and cheerful, sounded somehow dark and subdued this day. What's wrong? You sound tired today.
Not at all. I'm as energetic as ever.
Is that so? Well, if you say so.
Anyway, thanks for the gaming console.
About that. Since I'm not up to date with what elementary school kids like these days, I sent what was recommended to me. Did Kendrick really enjoy it?
Of course he did. He was really happy, saying, "Grandma knows best."
For some reason, Violet seemed in a hurry to end the call, as if she wanted to avoid prolonging our conversation. Are you guys doing okay?
Why the sudden concern? We're managing fine. So don't worry about us, Mom.
You've complained before about Albert coming home late. Has anything changed since then?
You worry too much. I told you not to mind it. Forget about that. Look, phone calls aren't free, you know, so I'm going to hang up now. You must be busy with the shop, too.
Just wait a minute. Right now, I'm more concerned about you than. But before I could finish, Violet had already hung up on me. Just by asking about her well-being, why does Violet seem to reject me this much? It's as if she doesn't want me to probe into her family's affairs, dodging my questions and cutting off the conversation unilaterally. I can't shake the feeling that something is not right. I felt a sense of foreboding. After the shop closes, it has become a routine for Matthew and me to have a quiet drink in the living room. That night, as usual, we relaxed, sharing the weariness of the day. It's about Violet. Something seems off. She seems tired, or maybe lacking energy. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Do you call her sometimes?
I just called her this afternoon. But she cut me off abruptly.
Is she keeping you at a distance?
More like she doesn't want to worry me. It might just be my mother's intuition, and I might be wrong, but I feel like Violet is hiding something from me. Matthew crossed his arms and fell silent for a moment before speculating.
Could it possibly be related to that?
To what? After hesitating, as if unsure whether to speak, Matthew seemed to make up his mind.
I heard something troubling from one of our regulars about Albert.
What happened with Albert?
The regular mentioned seeing him coming out of a pub with a woman, not Violet.
That can't be. Albert wouldn't do such a thing.
The woman apparently wasn't young, but was quite beautiful, dressed flamboyantly in what seemed like expensive brands.
It must be a case of mistaken identity. I said this seemingly in defense of Albert. Not so much to defend Albert, but more so because I didn't want to see a rift form between Violet and him, a sentiment more accurately described as parental concern.
Of course, the regular couldn't be sure it was Albert, just someone who looked somewhat like him.
I didn't want to believe this witness account at face value. Yet, I've heard that Albert has been coming home late and going out more on weekends lately. Could it be that he is seeing another woman behind Violet's back, unknown to us? Without any concrete information, my thoughts inevitably drift towards the worst. I'm worried about Violet. She never complains or shows weakness. If she knows about this and is suffering in silence.
Don't think too negatively. I'll see what I can do. For starters, we know a lawyer among our regulars. I'm thinking of consulting him.
Since then, concern for Violet has preoccupied me daily, to the point of accidentally dropping and breaking dishes. What's wrong? You seem tired yourself. I paused my work to call Violet multiple times, but she rarely answered. When she did, her updates were surprisingly brief, simply saying, "I'm fine." But whenever I tried to delve deeper into family matters, she'd laugh it off and hang up quickly. Each time I heard Violet's voice over the phone, it sounded weaker, as if it might fade away at any moment. Recalling Violet's charming, beloved smile before her marriage, I felt increasingly overwhelmed by my growing anxieties, leading to tears. Then, about half a year later, I received a sudden call from Violet, who had not contacted us for some time. And it was past 8 p.m. Such calls from Violet, now with her own family, were rare at this hour unless it was daytime. I instinctively felt that something serious must have happened. Violet? What's going on? Calling at this hour? What happened? Violet didn't respond. All I could hear from the other end of the phone was a quiet voice, as if air was leaking out. Despite holding the receiver, I was certain it was Violet. Is there anyone around you? Are you alone there? The lack of noisy chatter in the background led me to this conclusion.
Mom!
With a feeble voice, as if squeezing it out, Violet finally spoke. Violet. What's wrong? Are you really okay?
Mom, help me!
Sensing an emergency, I pressed the speakerphone button. Matthew quickly came to my side, listening intently. Violet, pull yourself together. Tell Mom what happened.
It hurts. I haven't eaten anything. I might not make it.
Haven't eaten anything? What do you mean?
I haven't been given anything to eat by Florence and the others.
The image of Violet crawling on the floor, desperately reaching out for my help, flashed through my mind.
Violet is in danger,
Matthew yelled, grabbing the car keys and heading towards the entrance.
I'm coming to get you right now,
I shouted through the phone, quickly following Matthew. During the drive, we were silent the entire time. Matthew kept his mouth shut, gripping the steering wheel, his brows furrowed, veins standing out on his forehead. There was an indescribable anxiety and anger at the possibility that our precious Violet was being subjected to injustice. If I looked in the mirror, I'm sure I would see the same expression on my face as on Matthew's. Holding back the tears, I closed my eyes and saw Violet's innocent, youthful smile. The image of a pure, innocent girl reaching out to Matthew and me with her tiny hands, trying to share happiness, filled me with frustration. Violet was asking for help. Thinking this made us feel incredibly ashamed for not noticing her suffering sooner. Even without seeing her directly, it was clear from her voice on the phone that Violet was severely weakened. I couldn't believe that Violet, who always had a vibrant smile, was now in such a state, calling for help. Looking out the passenger window at the dark town, I thought,
this must be a dream, a bad dream.
Passing through a quiet residential area, the light leaking from each home seemed to carry the laughter of families, reminding me of what Violet in our life should be, which brought more sadness. The journey that usually takes an hour during the day was quicker due to the lack of rush hour traffic, and we soon arrived at the Adams house. Are you okay? If you want, I can go in alone. Matthew spoke kindly, showing concern for me, but this was a problem for our family to face. Preparing for whatever reality awaited us, I resolved. We will definitely save Violet with our own hands. When I rang the doorbell, a carefree voice responded after a pause. Hello? Who is it at this hour? Contrary to the urgent call from Violet, Albert's relaxed and peaceful voice left us puzzled.
It's Smith, Violet's mother.
Upon hearing my name, Albert fell silent, possibly on guard, then slowly asked,
Is there something wrong?
He then cracked the door open slightly, peering out at us standing outside.
I'm sorry for bothering you late at night, Albert. It's urgent, and we need to talk.
Matthew wedged his foot into the slight opening of the door and forcefully pushed it open.
What are you doing, Matthew?
We're coming in. We barged in with a determined attitude, not taking no for an answer. Standing in front of a dimly lit, narrow room at the end of the hallway.
Is Violet in here?
There's no explaining why we thought Violet was in this room, but we instinctively knew she was here, calling out to us for help.
This is outrageous. Even if you are Violet's parents, I'll call the police.
Good.
That way, the police can witness this too.
Without hesitation, Matthew forcefully slid open the room's door. There, Violet was curled up on the floor, resembling a worn and discarded mop. It took a few seconds for my brain to recognize that it was indeed Violet, so emaciated and altered was her appearance.
Violet! Oh, what has happened to you?
We rushed to Violet, lifting her weakened body in our arms.
Mom, help me! I'm in pain. I can't take it anymore.
Barely speaking between erratic breaths, that's how Violet responded. It was immediately clear that Violet was delirious and suffering from dehydration.
What are you doing here?
Leave immediately. Albert tried to dismiss us as if we were intruders, but his voice lacked any conviction. His gaze wandered as if frightened, and his body trembled.
Albert! Bring some water now! I can't possibly. Don't argue, just do it.
Pressured by my stern shout, Albert ran to the kitchen and quickly returned with a bottle of water from the fridge. I snatched the bottle, opened it. Here, Violet. Drink some water. Alerted by the commotion, Florence and Aurora also appeared. What is all this noise about?
It's so loud I can't hear the TV.
We're the ones who need an explanation here. As Matthew glared at Albert, Albert began to apologize profusely.
I'm so sorry.
Albert then started to explain how Violet ended up in this state, a story beyond our wildest imaginations. It seemed that initially, Violet and Albert had managed well living with Florence. However, at some point, Albert started coming home late, and in response, Florence's attitude towards Violet turned cold. One day, when Violet felt anxious about Albert's late returns, she sought advice from Florence. Instead of addressing her concerns, Florence blamed Violet for Albert's absence. Violet couldn't understand why she was being blamed.
It's because you haven't returned to your pre-pregnancy figure,
Florence told her. Following that, Florence began imposing all household chores on Violet and even restricted her meals. Despite this, Violet remained upbeat, brushing off the unreasonable demands, but it seemed Florence found no amusement in her resilience. The harassment escalated, and under the guise of preventing secret snacking, Florence took control of all Violet's finances. Seeing an opportunity for entertainment, Aurora, the recently divorced sister-in-law, joined in, with Florence assigning her to monitor Violet whenever Florence was away. The hardest part for Violet was being denied the opportunity to care for Kendrick herself. Despite living under the same roof, there was nothing more painful and sad than not being able to raise her own child. Florence forbade Violet from seeing Kendrick and had Aurora stop her whenever she tried to approach his room. While Violet was punished with cleaning duties, Florence spent joyful moments with Kendrick. "This is all I know," Albert said, collapsing to his knees, powerless.
Don't speak of our family's shame so lightly. How could you discuss such trivial matters with strangers?
Albert, you've become so weak.
That's not all, is it? There's more you're hiding, right?
Albert looked up, his face flashing with panic. Just then, a taxi stopped at the entrance and someone alighted.
They've arrived.
The Addams family was confused, unable to grasp the situation. Soon, a slender gentleman in his 50s appeared, causing Albert's face to turn pale.
It seems you recognize this gentleman, don't you?
Albert didn't answer, realizing he was in a situation with no escape. He waited silently, letting time pass. "Good evening. My name is Kevin Watson. I believe this is the first time I've had the pleasure of meeting the Addams family in person." Kevin Watson introduced himself, looking at each member of the Addams family in turn. In his youth, Kevin Watson was a popular actor known to everyone, starring in movies and dramas. As he aged, his popularity waned, leaving only his name known to the public.
"Why is Mr. Kevin Watson at our home?"
Florence, representing the Addams family, asked, her smile strained and her voice high-pitched with clear agitation. It was clear to anyone that she was visibly shaken.
"It was I who invited Mr. Watson here. Before coming, I contacted a lawyer acquaintance and asked Mr. Watson to join us as well." "And what exactly is the relationship between Mr. Watson and us?"
Florence attempted to feign ignorance, but I smirked and said,
"Don't pretend you don't know anything. You must have some idea why Mr. Watson is here."
The lawyer arrived shortly after, apologizing for his delay. "Sorry for being late. I was organizing some documents for another case, and it took longer than expected." The arrival of the lawyer silenced the Addams family. "In fact, at Sierra's request, I've been investigating Albert's personal life for the past 6 months. It turns out, Albert has been frequently meeting a certain woman, a wealthy client at the department store where Albert works. And upon investigating this woman, we uncovered a shocking truth.
That woman happens to be my wife, Hillary Sanders."
Kevin Watson added in a calm tone to the lawyer's explanation. "When my wife brought up divorce, I was initially surprised, but deep down, I felt, of course. She had been going out secretly for a while. After hearing the details from this lawyer, everything made sense. So, we decided to come here to hear directly from Mr. Albert, the party involved." Albert slowly stood up, and in a frail voice, as if devoid of spirit, began to tell everything.
"My relationship with Hillary started, as mentioned earlier, through her being a major client at the department store and me being the attendant. Over the years of working visits to her home, we developed a relationship. Initially, it was just a fling for me, but then it was revealed Hillary was pregnant, and we realized we couldn't turn back. We discussed leaving our partners to remarry. I'm truly sorry."
At Kevin Watson's feet, filled with indignation, Albert collapsed powerlessly. "When I was a celebrated actor, adored by the public, Hillary would always greet me with her brightest smile. But now that my work has dwindled, meeting a handsome man like you must have been irresistible for her. She's the type who must have everything she likes," Kevin Watson said with a weary smile. Albert, who wanted a divorce from Violet, was in a bind because filing for divorce while having an affair would lead to a hefty compensation claim against him. So, he turned to Florence for help. Initially, Florence resisted the idea of divorce due to how it would look but changed her tune completely upon learning the other woman was wealthy. Thinking there would be no need to pay compensation if Violet, the daughter-in-law, initiated the divorce, Florence began to torment her relentlessly, hoping to drive her out of the house.
"I believed you, but you..."
Violet, staggering yet standing firm on her feet, expressed her frustration loudly, tears streaming down her face.
"I believed that if I lost weight, Albert would return to me. That's why I endured all the unreasonable demands from Florence and Aurora. To think it was all a scheme to drive me out."
"It's okay. You've done nothing wrong. You don't have to push yourself anymore." I embraced Violet tightly. I did want to divorce Violet, that's true. But I never imagined Mom and Aurora could be this cruel to her. I'm utterly disillusioned.
Wait just a minute. I was only trying to help you by getting Violet out of this house. It's your fault for having an affair in the first place.
That's right. Albert, you've been silently condoning what we've been doing.
Don't act like you were oblivious to it all now.
As the three of them argued, I was speechless, but Violet, trembling with anger, shouted,
Enough! If you so desperately wanted me out of here, I'll leave on my own.
Oh, that would be a relief. You're mistaken to be pleased, Florence. I will never forgive you. Once we're divorced, I will indeed demand a substantial amount in compensation, just so you know. With that, Violet called out with a voice that echoed through the house.
Kendrick! Where are you? Come here, we're going to live with Mom and Grandpa and Grandma from now on.
Okay, coming. Kendrick cheerfully ran down the stairs and hugged Violet. Subsequently, Albert, exposed for his affair with a client, was dismissed from his company for severely damaging the corporate image. Following her declaration, Violet filed for divorce and sued Albert for a significant amount in compensation. After losing his job and being ordered to pay compensation for the divorce, Albert, following a major argument with Florence and Aurora, was forced to reluctantly sell the house. Violet's anger did not subside with this. She also demanded substantial compensation from Florence and Aurora for the mental and physical distress they caused her. Despite the harassment from Florence and Aurora, Violet had meticulously documented the daily events in a notebook, which proved advantageous in court. Returning to her parents' home, Violet gradually healed both mentally and physically, reverting to her cheerful self. There were ongoing issues with the Addams family, but with the help of a skilled lawyer, everything was resolved. I heard through the grapevine that Albert and Hillary had a child. After losing his job and the house, Albert, supported by Hillary's wealth but devoid of the will to work, grew increasingly unkempt. Moreover, with the elderly Florence and the nagging Aurora joining them, Hillary, raised in luxury, could not stand it and eventually left with the child. What became of the Addams family after Hillary left is neither within my knowledge nor my interest.
Well, I've slacked off enough. Time to get to work.
With renewed determination, Violet started helping out at the store, taking over for me as I struggled with back pain. Having worked in customer service at a major department store, Violet's reputation quickly made our shop a local sensation, drawing long lines of customers. With our new promotional model in place, I have no regrets. I stepped back from the storefront, spending my free time watching over Kendrick as much as possible. Kendrick, soon to be a middle schooler, declared at his elementary school graduation, "I want to be a cool chef like Grandpa." His proclamation brought Matthew and me to tears. We are now eagerly looking forward to his future.